Is Jaylen Williams the best defensive line commit of the Luke Fickell era? We're going to talk about that next with Brian Smith, Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $5 bet. Or if you make a $5 bet and you win, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's over at FanDuel.com. You're not gonna regret it. The official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. We got that guy on. We got Brian Smith on because we have. Listen, what say you, Brian Smith? Jaylen Williams, 6'6", 4-star composite defensive lineman. This is what you've talked about the Badgers needing to do.
I'm glad that you finally started to do your job, Ryan. Thank you for helping out the Badger Nation with that. These are D-line recruiting over there. This is the kind of player that can at least begin to shape your program. To put it in perspective, the frame is exactly what you're looking for. He's explosive. He's athletic. He's good enough to play, in my opinion, from an athletic standpoint at any school in the country. He would fit Georgia's 3-4 defense or the Badgers' old 3-4 defense if you wanted. But in a 4-3 scheme, I think that he can get up the field and be disruptive as well. And, of course, their staff on defense is very good at changing looks up. He'll play in both. He might play some zero tech at some point later on in his career. It wouldn't shock me. He'll get up to 280, 290, no problem. And just be a menace in the middle trying to throw over because this kid he's like a basketball player with his length. So you can't teach that. That's where Wisconsin, they'd have won the game this past weekend if they had a couple more kids like him that were sophomores, juniors on their D-line. They'd have had a deflection for a pick or another sack or something. I mean, Oregon did not play their A game and Wisconsin's defense did. Obviously, the offense for the Badgers stunk, and that we'll get to that in a minute. But you still could have won the game with one more defensive play. That's just recruiting. There is no other answer. It is 100% recruiting. Jaylen Williams is the example of that. Moving forward, you can only do so much with what you're given. You know, if you got a half tank of gas, you go as far as that gas gets you. And that's what happened against Oregon. This is the kind of kid you can center your defense around. And to be honest, Fickell really didn't have these guys at Cincinnati. He didn't get 6'6" guys. He got a bunch of undersized guys that were twitchy and they maximized, but they didn't have any 6'5.5" defensive tackles walking in the door at Cincy. None. This is a big pickup. And to be honest, it's ironic because they flipped him for Michigan, a team that obviously their two interior D tackles. There's not many that have been better coached in the last decade. Those guys are tremendous. So hats off to Fickell and his staff. Really, really big pickup.
You talked about the versatility. Like he's a guy I can definitely see on the edge, but then sliding inside on pass rushing situations, wingspan to disrupt those short passing attacks. He kind of reminds me of Frame. You remember like a DeForest Buckner back when he was at Oregon?
Oh, God. That kid was just an animal. Yeah.
But he's got like that type of frame. And you and I talked with Wilderness and Telemock. When Telemock left, you and I both said he's not – Telemach's not a blue chip guy, but you got to be able to replace him with another guy that has like a 6'5", 6'6" frame. This is replacement.
But this kid's the same thing, but better physically. It's an incredible switch for Badgers. Incredible.
Where do you think he needs to still get better?
Probably the same things that most D linemen. He's so naturally strong and athletically twitchy for his size that he plays high sometimes. That's a no-bueno. In the Big Ten, you will get your ribs, as you well know, hammered when that happens. And he's also a guy that he could probably just add to his repertoire. He needs some more moves. That's just a time thing and how much you commit yourself. Nothing unusual. Other than that, though, again, for his length and his height, for him to be that twitchy, he can be a one-gap, three-tech. Those guys are hard to find at 6'3". At 6'6", they're uber rare. So he has a chance to be an all Big Ten kind of guy. I will take the upside over some of the basic, fundamental things that most D linemen struggle with at the prep level.
How big of a get is this when you're in the middle of a season that, quite frankly, hasn't gone quite the way it was? I mean, not even – they just fired their offensive coordinator. They lost 42-10 to Iowa. It felt like a lot of momentum was not trending in the right direction. And then you're still going to be able to finish out with a 4-star defensive lineman. We're going to talk about Carter Smith in a second. How big of a get is that, and how impressive when your team on field is maybe not living up to your standards?
Well, this is a two-parter for me. Number one, your defense is legit, and he saw the vision based on what they did to Oregon. If they didn't play like that against Oregon, do you really think he'd still be committed, or would he even considered it? Blah, blah, blah. I don't think those things are really going to happen. That's just my opinion. Two, he's from Palatine High School, suburban Chicago. That's a program, as long as I can remember, has had players. It's a good area to get kids from. If Wisconsin is going to be ever, I don't know, for lack of a better phrase, an upper echelon Big Ten team, and remember now, Oregon and SC don't help your cause. You can't miss on kids like this, and that means beating Michigan, Notre Dame, and Ohio State for Chicago kids. Normally, that's not a Wisconsin strong kind of deal. They struggle with that. They flat beat Michigan for this kid. Nobody from the Michigan side is going to tell me that they didn't want him. I will laugh in their face. So I think this is the kind of the trend. They got to get, now this is the hard part. You got to get 2 or 3 of these every year. Let me be clear. I said every year. That's where it gets rough. And I think Wisconsin's going to have to expand their range, because you're not going to just get the Chicago kids. Oh, there's plenty of them. Milwaukee, Detroit, Indianapolis. They got to get the kids from all over the Midwest and maybe take a JUCO or do something else. And then the final one, I know you and I have discussed this a lot. You got to get kids like Jaylen from the portal, and that means overspending. D lineman in the portal, it is insane what it costs. Either you want to pony up or you're going to be a 6-6 program. It's up to the Wisconsin faithful to figure that out, and the administration. You got to get a guy like that pretty much every year, and that plan is in place for about 50 schools. That's why you got to overpay. There is no fun number, but $500K is a low number for a good D lineman in the portal.
Is it the best defensive line get of the Fickell era? Last year you had Ernest Willer Jr. You have Nicholas Clayton, who's really more of an outside linebacker, though. But is this the best D-line win of the Fickell era?
I think Willer was the safer pick. Williams has the higher ceiling because of his height. Willer, I think, will end up being a 2-year starter for the Badgers conservatively. I think he's got a chance to play in the NFL, and he's a really sharp kid. But this guy, you can't teach the length. And as Bobby Bowden used to talk about this all the time, and I thought it was comical back then. 25 years ago, it's like, we didn't get enough D linemen. This is like on signing day when they had the number 1 class. I'm like, what? Shut up. You got 3 guys in the top 250 that are D linemen, and he'd still complain. He knew how important D linemen were. So this is an important trend, because you're not going to get the second one if you don't get the first one. Chicago is loaded with underclassmen D linemen. This maybe can help with some of that. But again, they got to get a Detroit kid. They got to get a Cleveland kid. They got to get somebody from a school that you don't normally think. But did anybody really think from the outside looking in that Michigan was going to lose at Wisconsin? I mean, for a D lineman?
Yeah.
There is no other path for them to take the next step. I mean, they're well coached. I think that's obvious. It's just recruiting. They're going to have to beat teams for kids like this. And his upside is through the roof. I mean, he could be a first-round draft pick. He could be a kid that also doesn't start with Wisconsin. Got to fix the technical stuff. But I have faith in Wisconsin's staff. They've taken kids that were nowhere near as good as Jaylen Williams out of high school, and they ended up being guys that got drafted. So if Jaylen listens, he will be rewarded.
Yeah, you're making Badger fans smile. I had 2 or 3 Badger fans that reached out to me as soon as Jaylen hit, and they're like, got to see what Brian Smith says about this. You got to get Brian Smith on the show and talk about it. So the insight's always great. We're coming up. We're going to talk about a quarterback that Brian Smith has seen that's trending to Wisconsin. Carter Smith, pros and cons there. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick break for our friends of the show over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is incredible. It's the best way to get real sports money action. Over 10 million members, billions of dollars. It's daily fantasy, but made easy and accessible for everybody. Simple to use. Fast, easy. You're just picking more or less on statistical categories. No longer are you competing with people who are running like thousands of simulations and gaming the system. No, it's just more or less. That's all. If you think maybe Justin Jefferson over 83.5 yards, Lamar Jackson more than 1.5 touchdowns, that's all you're doing. And that's why I use it. I use it personally because it's simple. I don't have to go through a lot of machinations, a lot of work, a lot of effort. Just more or less on 1 or 2 statistical categories. Real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineup stays in place even if your players get injured. Right now, download the app. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. the ultimate daily fantasy platform, courtesy of the Locked On Network. All right, let's get Brian Smith back in here. Talk about Carter Smith. So we had exchanged messages a couple weeks ago when it kind of looked like maybe he was trending Florida State. Will Fong had a bomb out there. He was going to visit. It looks like all signs right now pointing to Wisconsin for Carter Smith, the quarterback out of Florida. What are your thoughts on his game?
Well, a couple of things. Last night, Florida State got a commitment from Kevin Sperry, a quarterback they flipped from Oklahoma. So they're out of the mix, which surprises me. But he's a kid that had visited Florida State for summer camp like last year, about this time, and did well, and they flipped him. So that eliminates them. But Carter's a kid I've seen a couple of times, Elite 11, etc. Really athletic, does not fit the profile at all of a traditional Wisconsin quarterback. He's very mobile. He's a kid that's a willing runner. There's a play on his senior film. He plays at Bishop Faroe down in Fort Myers. Not the biggest level of competition, but he throws a tall sweep to a kid, and he's the lead blocker and throws a shoulder bump into a kid and decks him. So
right,
he doesn't look like it. I mean, but he's got that mentality, kind of a Wisconsin player. Not the biggest kid in the world, but he's improved his size. Like he's put on probably 15 pounds in the last year or so since I last saw him live. And he's just a gamer because he doesn't care if he has to run it, throw it, if it's an option play, whatever. He doesn't care. He's just very, very competitive and very astute. From an affluent family, he's from a program that's always winning. They're well coached. I think he will have a chance to play as a redshirt freshman. And I mean, he has a far higher ceiling than what Wisconsin's got a quarterback right now. It's not close. And he's got a natural touch to him. He can throw the deep ball, whether it's on a line or he can throw a level 3 ball that's got some arc to it. He is well-versed. Again, Bishop Faroe is a pretty good program, and they're well coached. So he's been through all the things that he needs to get ready to go to college. Now it's just about continuing his craft.
And that play you reference is actually right here. We put the film up. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can watch the film. Here's that kind of the lead sweep with him just leveling a defender out in the flat there. What about – so one of the things watching his film, and I'm not a quarterback scout, obviously, but I'm curious your take on it. He looks a little like and he is a baseball player. He's a pitcher. He looks a little like a baseball player throwing the football. Like it's a bit of an odd delivery. What are your thoughts on his footwork, delivery, kind of the mechanical parts of playing quarterback that you can pick up from film?
Well, first off, I'm guessing he's probably played middle infield and or center field as well because he's such a good athlete. That's good news, bad news. The athleticism shows out more, but those guys are taught like you ain't got enough time. You got to make the throw no matter where your feet are. You try to set, but that kind of creeps into the quarterback realm as well. I was talking about this with Kevin Sperry on my show, Locked On Seminoles, earlier today. When you get a clean pocket, you have to set your feet. Even if you got to take a little longer, just throw it harder. Set your feet. There is no exception. Sometimes he doesn't. And when he gets outside the pocket, sometimes he doesn't turn and get his shoulder square because he's so naturally gifted. At the Big Ten level, that 1 inch is the difference between a touchdown and a pick six. So you do that against Michigan State, against, Iowa, somebody that traditionally has good defenses. Obviously, Ohio State, Penn State, that's a whole nother realm that can get you in trouble. That's why I think he needs the red shirt. I'm sure he's going to start. No. If he starts at Wisconsin next year, guys are winning 4 games. Okay, it's not a good idea. He's not ready for that. But when he does set his feet, like right here, he's under pressure. He's at least got his shoulders turned. Okay, well, he's going to run. But he had himself set up to do it there. Sometimes he didn't, and he would still complete passes. That's a little iffy because it sets the tone in your mind. Oh, I can get away with this. It's a terrible idea long term. That's the only thing I really see. I think he throws pretty naturally, personally, but that's only when he sets his feet. Some of the goofiness that you see because his feet aren't set and he's not square to the line, and then he gets in trouble.
What's his upside? Does he remind you of a quarterback? I know Michigan fans had kind of thrown the J.J. McCarthy comp out there because he committed to Michigan. Is it that type of a quarterback?
I think that's a pretty good comp. Not as big physically. Riley Leonard a little bit, a little more natural of a thrower than Riley is. But those guys are annoying. I've never met a defensive coordinator that wanted to play against a guy that they had to spy because it takes somebody out of coverage. There's been a number of plays like McCarthy last year, even against Ohio State, which you're not going to find a faster defense really. He'd find a way to get 4 yards when he was surrounded and should have been sacked for a 7-yard loss. That is a gut-wrenching play for a defense. Carter will do that. Now, again, he's playing like 2-3A competition. I don't know what level they are this year, but right around there. And he's pretty good. And he's played against teams like Tampa Jesuit that play like 5, 6, 7A comp, and he can compete with them too, and he's fine. Very astute kid, very, very intellectually gifted, will fit right into the Wisconsin student body. He's not going to have any problems academically. I think this is a kid that is your future quarterback if they get it. They would do very well. This isn't the kind of guy they normally get. This would be arguably the best quarterback they've ever signed in my lifetime out of high school.
Did Florida State prioritize the other guy that they just got, or in your opinion, did Carter Smith kind of lean Wisconsin and then Florida State went a different direction?
I don't know the full backstory. I'll have to ask Carter the next time I run into it, but I do know, like, this is where it gets interesting. His family has ties to like Florida, Miami, and LSU. The last one I'll get to in a second. But Florida State was never that school. So I wonder if the family ties, they just didn't want to go to Florida. Like, they've never, like a lot of my Gators. So that Florida thing is real. Like, the hate is real. I lived through that every day with Gator comments on my Seminole show, but that's another story. The interesting thing is he went to LSU, but they had Bryce Underwood, who was being recruited and all that during the time, and they didn't show him much love. And he kind of like, yeah, I'm not going to go there. He talked to me about it. Well, Bryce Underwood just flipped to Michigan. So I'm curious if LSU tries to get back involved because now they don't have a quarterback in this class. Michigan paid over $10 million.
Yeah.
It's insane. Like, again, when I was talking about what Wisconsin's got to do moving forward, their administration is going to have some really difficult conversations, but that's a show for another day. They're going to have to find a way to maybe hold off LSU or somebody else possibly, but right now it looks like the Badgers. We'll have to see. And I'm guessing that he likes the path to playing time in Wisconsin better than he does Baton Rouge. They're pretty loaded at quarterback anyway, even without Underwood. So if they came after him, it'd be pretty difficult. So
let me ask you this. So the Badgers, again, Carter Smith hasn't officially announced. There's a lot of crystal ball type action that has been going to Wisconsin. We'll have to wait and see if that comes true. But if it does, right, and they finish with Jaylen Williams, Carter Smith, the class will be around. Obviously, there's other teams that are going to move up or down a little bit, but you're talking about around the 20th to 22nd type class in the country. Is that about where Wisconsin needs to live, or does that still need to get a little bit better?
Oh, it needs to get a lot better. I know that's This is where the money part comes in. There is no shortcut here, brother. Jaylen Williams, you need 3 of them in every class. That's to go over that hump now with how much better the Big Ten got. Reality is Wisconsin's going to be roughly a 6-6 kind of team with their schedule until they've had multiple years of guys like this. Next year, I expect it to be kind of rough again. I mean, they start with Alabama. That doesn't really help, but
we're going to that game. We've talked about this. You and I are going to.
I'm definitely going to go up to that, but they have to get multiple years with better recruits, increase spots, quarterback, D-line, DN, corner. Corner started a little bit last year, and I've seen them develop guys that aren't necessarily the highest ranked. I mean, Sauce Gardner, nobody wanted basically, and he was at a really good program in Detroit. So they figured it out. Mike Mickens and everybody on that staff at Cincinnati. I mean, he's going to be a Hall of Famer. So they got to find somebody like that on defense, but they need a guy like that on the D-line every year that they have a chance with. You got to get 2-3 of them minimum, and I know that's not Wisconsin's bag usually, but if you're going to be even an 8-4 team moving forward, you're not better than Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan in recruiting by a mile, but you also have USC, like Oregon's recruiting's elite. SC can be right now they're in turmoil, but I wouldn't be surprised if Danton Lynn ends up being the head coach there. Good defense coordinator. So all those programs historically are better. Washington can be. I mean, that's a rough road. I mean, Indiana, if Cignetti stays there, I mean, Wisconsin doesn't play them this year, do they?
No. They'll get them next year.
I mean, obviously that's good luck. I mean, he's figured it out. So that league is hard. It's going to, this is, in my opinion, the first of 3 needed classes with some bigger name guys, and they still need more than they got to even get back to 8-4. I know Wisconsin fans are throwing tomatoes at their screen right now, but it's just the schedule. You have to be a lot better than you used to be just to get to 8-4 in the Big Ten anymore, because those other teams are just way better as far as depth and especially at the explosive spots, end, corner, etc. They just have way more talent, and that's why watching Wisconsin try to pass protect and keep their quarterback safe against Oregon. That kid was scared to death in the fourth quarter. He had zero interest in being out there. He knew they couldn't block him, and they couldn't.
Yeah.
So we
knew that too.
13. Oh yeah, I mean he's not the guy. He's not.
Yeah,
But at the
we knew
same
that too.
time, give him some freaking help. They're
Yeah,
nowhere
no,
near where they need to be on offense, not in the stratosphere.
it goes back to the things we've talked about, right? Vinny Anthony's probably the best receiver on the team right now, but realistically, Vinny's a 3 on a good team. Like Vinny is not your starting 1 or 2. Offensive line had the issues against Oregon. The running backs aren't what Wisconsin typically has had. Like the tight end room we've talked about a bunch of times. It's easy to point at Braden Locke as the quarterback, and he's not good enough either. But everything around him also needs to tier up. And we've talked about that multiple times, which is going to lead into our next conversation. Phil Longo, no longer the Badgers offensive coordinator. I'm very fascinated to get your take on that. And Badger fans, should they be confident in Luke Fickell, who hired Phil Longo, to make the next hire? We're going to do that next, Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at ZBiotics. ZBiotics is the ZBiotics Pre Alcohol drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted to a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and you'll feel your best tomorrow. This is how you do it. If you've never used it before, it's super simple. Make your pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, do it responsibly. Don't go ham wild out there. Drink some water. Don't go crazy. Get some rest. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling the best refreshed version of yourself, ready to take on the day. Go to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more. Get 50% off your first order when you use code LockedOnCollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for checkout at 15% off. Today's episode also brought to you by our great friends over at FanDuel, longtime partners of the Locked On Podcast Network. Spice up your sports weekend with the official sports book of the NFL, of the Locked On Podcast Network. Fast, simple, easy. Badgers plus are -5.5 tonight, or plus -5.5 tonight for the basketball game if you want to get on that. And they are plus 2.5 going to Nebraska this week and head into Memorial Stadium as both teams fight for bowl eligibility. Big game there. If you want to get in on that action, maybe parlay those two, head over to FanDuel.com. Remember, $5 bet, first time $5 bet gets you $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if you win. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Okay. Phil Longo, what were your thoughts when you saw the Badgers decide to move on from Phil Longo?
Good.
Yeah.
He's tried to force the square peg into a round hole. From listening to some other people that are familiar with him, covered North Carolina, etc., they made some good points talking about like Carolina has the skill guys over the last 10 years at wide receiver Wisconsin doesn't get. They threw a ton of bombs off play action. My guy's faster than yours, and they obviously had quarterbacks that my dead grandmother could coach. So that kind of helps. They had back-to-back NFL guys. That's extremely rare. So he kind of benefited from that. When they went to Wisconsin, I didn't know if the fit was there, but I wanted to see Wisconsin opening up, so I gave him benefit of the doubt. But he tried to run stuff that their quarterbacks just aren't good enough yet, and he's not an elite recruiter. Mac Brown was the key to getting some of those kids. Anyway, the bottom line is still the same. They're going to have to be a little more run heavy than I would like for the short term. But long term, if you're going to beat Penn State, if you're going to beat Ohio State, et cetera, you're not going to line up with 7 guys at the line of scrimmage, a quarterback and a running back, and 2 generic wide receivers and move the ball down the field 4 yards of play against Ohio State. That is the objective. I mean, they want to get back to being at least a contender for the Big Ten title game. They're not in the stratosphere with that, and it starts outside. So whoever they hire, they still need a spread guy. I know this probably not, I'm not saying he's going to go, but like they need somebody in the Den Brock mold that's at Notre Dame, Coach Jaden Daniels, mobile guy, because if they get Carter Smith, that would be somebody from that profile. There's plenty of them, but they have to be willing to understand, look, we're not getting 4-3 wide receivers like the Hurricanes or the Longhorns, et cetera. We got some big guys, more back shoulder fades. Tight end recruiting needs to change completely. Whoever it is has to understand that they're more likely to get those guys. And by the way, that's really surprising with Wisconsin style that Wisconsin doesn't have better tight ends. Short passes to the flat, bootlegs, waggles. And then you tell me this. Why is Wisconsin not better at running back? I know they got a couple guys in this past class. What had happened? How does that happen at Wisconsin? Like that's pre-Fickell concern to me. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, the last couple of years of the Paul Christ era, like the recruiting department fell off. So for those who you may or may not know this, Badger fans know this all too well because we griped about it. Paul Christ didn't fill out his recruiting department for like a year. So he had Michigan State's guy who left for Michigan State, and then he just didn't hire a replacement recruiting coordinator for about 9 months. That was towards the end of the Paul Christ era.
That's right off the bat. That's a fireable offense after 2 weeks.
So you ask about what were the running backs in the stable. They didn't have a recruiting coordinator for like 9 months. And when they talked to Paul Christ about it, he said, I think it was essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but everyone's got a little more on their plate now, but it's okay. Yeah.
That's not how that works at all.
No, I agree. So that was part of the downfall of Paul Christ, though, right? The lack of understanding the importance of a recruiting department, the people in those spots, how important it is to fill those immediately with high quality people. And that's something Luke Fickell does, right? Like Luke Fickell brought his recruiting guys over from Cincinnati to Wisconsin, and they're really good. Like you're seeing Wisconsin wasn't getting Jaylen Williams before Luke Fickell. They weren't getting a Carter Smith.
They would have been lucky to finish in the top 3.
They weren't getting a Darian Dupree or an Xavier Lucas, right? Like he's brought that recruiting up a tick. Now, as you mentioned, it's got to keep going. But I'm curious with the offensive coordinator spot, because there's a lot of Badger fans that say, well, you can't throw the ball at Wisconsin. Why did you mess with something that was working? Why can't we go back to that? Just 2 tight ends. And you kind of brought it up. You can't beat Ohio State by just hitting them with the hammer again and again.
Yeah, I want to see them run the ball a little more effectively. O-line recruiting can get better, more experience. There's little things with that. But I also think that the next guy they sign as the OC, he's got to embrace the mobile quarterback. Obviously, if they get Carter, that's a fit. He's a guy who can go get you 500 yards as a junior and senior. So if they do that, that gives them a chance against somebody like in Oregon on that final drive. When he came out on the field, I was chuckling because I'm like, this kid's about to get bludgeoned. You could just tell he didn't want to be there, in my opinion. But they need a playmaker back there. And that's what North Carolina did. And they were in the ACC and you needed one. The Big Ten, you definitely do, because the 2 leagues are not comparable outside of the top 2-3 teams. So I think they just got to get something that's going to give them a little more of their base short term, but they know that long term they got to adapt more. And that's recruiting, and that's embracing throwing the ball in an up-tempo like style, which they've done before under Fickell, but I don't know who the hire is going to be. I'm guessing you haven't really heard a whole lot of names yet, but his tree is pretty wide. I'm sure he's going to try to get a certain wide receiver coach from Ohio State, which he won't get. I have no idea who they're going to get. It's a massive hire. I don't know what they're paying their coordinators. This is my biggest concern. Kind of like recruiting in the portal. Are you willing to overpay? I didn't say pay market. I said overpay. Yeah, you can like this or dislike this. The better coordinators aren't going to want to go to Wisconsin. Why? They don't get the same talent. If you're going to get me, you're going to overpay to get me. That's not Wisconsin's bag as a normal situation. If they don't do that, that tells me they're not serious enough about being a Big Ten contender. They're not paying darn near $2 million for this coordinator. They failed.
So Longo was at 1.25, I believe, was where Longo was.
That's okay. That's not bad. But the next one's, if it's not like 1.7, 1.8, and it's not somebody that the guys on ESPN and like Urban on Fox, et cetera, go, oh, look at this, then we got a problem. They have to go over and above because of like what they got to work with right now. Why would you leave X to go to Y when it's, probably it's going to be a downgrade. You're going to have to overpay.
You know what's frustrating to me, and then we'll wrap it up here. Watching Oregon or watching Ohio State, not only do they have more talent than Wisconsin, but they've also been more creative, right? Like you can't be less creative and have less talent. You can't call a worse game with lesser talent. I think the Longo thing was a long time coming. The name that has been rumored the most is UNLV's offensive coordinator, Marion, the go-go offense. Like I think a lot of running principles there. That name has been thrown out. Gino Guidugli has been thrown out. He was with Luke Fickell in Cincinnati as a guy who could be that person. Let me ask you this. I want to wrap up on this question because whenever we get the OC, I'm definitely going to hopefully have you back on and get your thoughts on who that OC is. But you famously, I think on our first show a couple years ago, you said, Badger fans, hold up. You guys are getting ahead of yourselves. You're going to have a couple 6-7 win games or seasons with Luke Fickell, but it's going to be all right. Is your confidence still kind of there with Luke Fickell now that you've seen maybe Phil Longo not work, 42-10 Iowa? Where are you at on Luke Fickell right now, big picture?
I think this is kind of par for the course. This is his first major job. The Longo hire didn't work, but he's fixing it, or he's trying. My next step on saying something with that depends on the administration more than Luke. That's where Badger fans don't want to hear it. But I'm telling you, like 1718 is the bottom. You're not going to get the elite guys without overpaying. They cannot take a flyer on some up-and-comer. The guy, by the way, out of UNLV used to work with Norvell, so that'll be interesting to see. I don't know why anybody want to go to Florida State right now, but it's not like there's a ton of talent in Wisconsin's roster either. So that guy's really highly coveted. He's going to get offers from some of the Big 12, SEC, Big 10 teams that are winning more. You know, how do you win that battle? That's what I'm curious about. They've got to give Fickell support to a level that they're not used to doing. And it has to be now. It's not, well, we'll think. No, now, because you have to be able to make that call and tell them this is what we can pay. First phone call. A to B, we're serious. That's what Texas does. That's what Bama does. That's what Georgia does. That's what Michigan does. That's what Ohio State does. If they do that, they'll be fine. I think year 5, 6, 7 at Wisconsin will be good. Again, I knew this was going to be like a 4-year, like year 4, I think they'll be pretty good. And then on from there, they should win 8 or more games. But again, get Jaylen Williams, get Carter Smith. It's just better talent, man. So the coordinator thing sucks, but they'll fix that if they spend right.
He is the great Brian Smith. Stop by every week if I can get him, at least every other week when we can get him. Brian, thank you so much for tuning in, and go check him out at FBScout_Florida. When you're done here, go check out Locked On Big Ten, all the biggest conference news stories over on the Big Ten Network right there. On Wisconsin, basketball game tonight. We will talk later.